You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor. Subscribe to the channel. Leave your comments below. Be sure to smash that like button. As we have started to build toward the 2022 season, we've done a lot of position previews. And we have a certain consensus. I think you'd probably agree. Like, big question marks around the offensive line. You really just don't know who's going to start there. Everyone is obviously curious who's going to win the quarterback job. Tigers obviously have a major hole at tight end by Brian Kelly's own admission. They're going to have to be creative to figure it out. They're loaded at receiver. They're loaded at defensive line. Some really productive players at linebacker. A nice combo of young and old. And then there's the secondary. And the secondary is probably the most perplexing position on this LSU team. Because, LSU has rightfully earned the moniker of DBU. And normally we can start a season and just say, okay, well, that's on lockdown, and then you move from there. But it's really not the case this year because you lost essentially your entire secondary. Now, I'll grant you, Jay Ward is back. Major Burns was hurt last year, but he's healthy again. But Elias Ricks transferred to Alabama. I mean, the song and dance. Dwight McLaughlin's now at Arkansas. And you went and really attacked the transfer portal, bringing in guys with starting experience from Bernard-Converse and Seven Banks and Makai Gardner, Fouché and Brooks. And we've gone through it a ton when you look at that secondary and you realize, there's a lot of guys who have played a ton of football. Brooks and Fouché have been career starters at Arkansas. Bernard-Converse started 47 consecutive games at Oklahoma State, where it was all Big 12 last year. Makai Gardner, someone people are really excited on, very high on as far as his athletic potential. But, you've got a new secondary coach back there, obviously, in Kerry Cooks, and a whole new group of players and trying to figure out how it all molds together. And so, and I've said often throughout this offseason that, I think LSU can be good in the secondary. They're just not going to be, the players they lost are better than the players they brought in. That's been my take on this LSU secondary. And, I might be undervaluing this secondary. I'll grant you that I might be undervaluing them. And, I still believe Elias Ricks, of all the players from last year or this year in LSU secondary, Elias Ricks is the best, and he's not here anymore. So it's hard when you lose the best player in that group to say that you're better. But they might be better than I'm giving them credit for. And this is from Pro Football Focus. Pro Football Focus puts together their position rankings for college football. So they'll take the top 50 players at a position and rank them. And keep in mind, this has nothing to do with pro potential. They're not projecting guys to the next level. A great example of that, if you remember, was Michael Sam. Remember Michael Sam? I think everybody remembers Michael Sam mostly because he became the first openly gay athlete, and he was the SEC Defensive Player of the Year. But Michael Sam was never a projectable defensive player in the NFL, regardless of his orientation. He was just a short dude that didn't have a ton of speed, just wasn't really your prototypical edge rusher. So again, this isn't pro potential. This is ranking the best college players in the secondary. And this is from Pro Football Focus, which we put a lot of stock in Pro Football Focus. Not that it's the only metric, but it is a metric that's not based on subjectivity, but more objectivity based on how they put their metrics together and grade out players. So when I looked at this list, the top 50 defensive backs, it starts with Elias Ricks. That should go without saying. I told you, he's the best cornerback in college football. He was a 5-star. He came in, started as a freshman, led the SEC in interceptions. He's a freak show, and he's going to be a first-round draft pick after the season. It just sucks that he's playing at Alabama and not at LSU. Number 2 on the list is Cam Smith from South Carolina, who also has a chance to be a first-round pick. Clark Phillips from Utah, Keely Ringo from Georgia, who transferred in last year, missed part of the season, but is a fantastic player and pro prospect. And you go on down the list, and you'll see Jason Marshall from Florida. And 11th on the list is Bernard-Converse at LSU. And then a little below that, at 16, is Makai Gardner from LSU. As a matter of fact, on this list of the top 50, I'm sorry, not the top 50, forgive me, top 25, the top 25 players at the position. On this list of the top 25 cornerbacks in college football this year, there's only two schools that have multiple players. It's LSU and, oddly enough, North Carolina. Storm Duck. What's his name? Storm Duck. Storm Duck is on the list, and so is Tony Grimes at 24. So LSU and North Carolina are the only two schools in the country with multiple players on this list from Pro Football Focus. Again, it's a metric. It's not the metric, as I often say, but it does suggest that maybe LSU is in better hands there than I've given them credit for. Now, Pro Football Focus also graded out their. I went and looked at their top 50, pro prospects for this year, and you got a half dozen cornerbacks for this upcoming draft. So again, the difference in grading pro potential and grading college, defensive backs. I mean, you've got cornerbacks on this list. The number one cornerback they have ranked on the list is Keely Ringo, who I just mentioned, from Georgia. They have him as the 8th best prospect in this upcoming draft. Garrett Williams from Syracuse, they grade as the 16th best player in the draft. He's not even on the list. Well, let me make sure. I think he is on the list. He's just down low. Anyway, I mentioned that Elias Ricks is on this list. He's at 23, the 23rd overall prospect on the list. So you get my point. Cam Smith from South Carolina, the number 31 overall prospect for this upcoming draft for Pro Football Focus. They have him rated as the 2nd best cornerback in college football this year. So anyway, point is, just because you may not be a great pro prospect doesn't mean you're not going to be a really good college cornerback, and I think that's what LSU is dealing with here. I don't know that Jarek Bernard-Converse projects as a high draft pick. If athletically you are that, you're not hanging around college football for 4 or 5 seasons. You're 3 and you're out. You're Derek Stingley. You're what Elias Ricks will be. You're what likely Dwight McGlothern will be after this year at Arkansas. I mean, it's probably a situation where you would have had a guy, Christian Fulton, 3 and out, but for the off the field issues that he had, you understand. So, I think Jarek Bernard-Converse, what will be most interesting for me is watching him, if he's the guy that ultimately draws the assignment of the other team's best player, how will he fare against the best receiver from your opponent in the SEC week in and week out, as opposed to where he came from in the Big 12, where he was all Big 12. But when you're drawing the assignment of the number one receiver week in and week out from your opponent in this league, how do you fare? That's one question. 2 is, how much upside does Makai Gardner have? We haven't even talked about Sevyn Banks yet, or the guys that remain and the guys that came in this year and part of the freshman class. But Sevyn Banks is a guy that was a starter at Ohio State and lost his job only due to injury, which is why he's here now. Is he healthy? If he is, he might be a starter. But Makai Gardner is the guy all throughout spring that garnered, excuse the pun, the most attention. He was the guy that most people looked at and were like, you see that guy? Because athletically, he fits the mold. He doesn't have as much experience as a guy like Jarek Bernard-Converse or Sevyn Banks, but Makai Gardner is the one who fills out the uniform. He's 6'2", he's over 200 pounds. He's the big physical corner, the modern-day prototype of what you look for in a cornerback. How much can he improve this year in the Southeastern Conference? I think that's as much as anything, but in Pro Football Focus is rating him as the 16th best cornerback, not in the SEC, in all of college football this year. So maybe I am undervaluing the position at LSU. I know they've got a lot of guys that have played a bunch. They just haven't played together. So the pieces of that puzzle appear pretty good. How do they all come together? We'll start to find out 1 week from today on Thursday when LSU hits the practice field. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact. And be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.